Former Vice President Mike Pence is more than just a virulent homophobe. This past weekend, he also revealed himself to be a white nationalist. But can you really separate the two? I'll have more on Mike Pence's racism. But first, this is Jill Collin Jefferson. She's an African American woman. And up until this afternoon, she was sweltering in a Mississippi prison. All because of $35. $35. Mississippi has the largest percentage of black residents in America, yet it remains one of our country's most segregated states. Lexington, Mississippi, where Jill Collin Jefferson was arrested Saturday night, has a population of 1,800, 1,500 of whom are black. Only 300 white people in Lexington, Mississippi, and yet the mayor, the city attorney, the top judge, and a former police chief who seems to have held on to way too much power after retiring, they are all white in a town that is controlled by one wealthy white family named the Barretts. This town, Lexington, Mississippi, is a throwback to before the Civil Rights Acts of 64 and 65, which is why black residents are suing Lexington, Mississippi in federal court, accusing local police of violating their civil liberties. This lawsuit was filed by a nonprofit public interest group called Julian, and it's headed by this woman, Jill Collin Jefferson, who spent the weekend inside the Holmes-Humphreys County Regional Correctional Facility after Lexington, Mississippi police arrested her for videotaping patrol officers as they pulled African Americans off to the side of the road. It is perfectly legal in America to videotape police officers doing their job, unless you get too close and interrupt them. Police are not allowed to seize your phone after you film them unless they claim it's evidence, in which case that's up to a judge to decide. But usually, the evidence police are seizing is evidence that incriminates the police. According to reports, Jill Collin Jefferson, African-American woman, spent Saturday night in her car videotaping police stops. And there was one specific police stop that she was videotaping, and the officer didn't appreciate it. So he walked over to her car, asked for ID, which she reportedly gave him. He then asked her to step out of the car, and Jefferson, a lawyer, refused. And so he arrested her. Jefferson's organization, as I said, is Julian, and it's suing Lexington, Mississippi's police department before this arrest. And Ms. Jefferson claims her arrest is retaliation for Ms. Jefferson bringing Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke of the United States Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division down to Lexington, Mississippi a week ago, so she could hear the complaints from black residents of Lexington, Mississippi. Complaints about police brutality, unnecessary search and seizure, and of course, intimidation. So what does this all have to do with $35? When Jill Collin Jefferson was arrested Saturday night, she was taken before a judge who realized she was the lawyer suing his city for precisely the same reason she was hauled before him: police violating the rights of African Americans. So the judge made an exception and extended an offer to free her so long as she agreed to pay a $35 processing fee. He thought that was reasonable, but she refused to pay the fee. Instead, she braved the squalor, the heat, and the violence of a Mississippi prison cell so she would receive no special treatment just because she's a lawyer who can make trouble as well as bail. She was able to come up with $35 for a processing fee, but she said, no, take me here to the Holmes-Humphreys County Correctional Facility. She was released Monday afternoon. She spent the weekend in prison, jail. I'm going to try to play her statement. I don't know if this will work. Let's see if it works. May not. Wish me luck. This is Ms. Jefferson after she was released from the Holmes County Correctional Facility.
Black citizens here. They have been arresting them for no reason. They have been harassing them. They have been beating them up in custody. They have been sexually assaulting women, using their badges to get sexual favors from women in exchange for not arresting them, in exchange for not ticketing them. And finally, the other night, they didn't know who I was when I was riding around.
So I hope you could hear that. Instead of paying the $35 processing fee, she spent 2 nights at the Holmes-Humphreys County Correctional Facility. Ms. Jefferson, a lawyer, was trying to draw attention to how towns like Lexington, Mississippi, or Ferguson, Missouri, use Black people as cash cows, keeping them in perpetual cycles of debt by charging them for the privilege of a false arrest. She refused to pay the $35 processing fee, 2 nights in that hideous jail. Well, this is how too many cities throughout America pay their bills. Instead of raising taxes, they stop Black people. They stop them because they look suspicious. They stop them because there's a busted taillight, a fix-it ticket that they could write, or an old bench warrant for a previous fix-it ticket. Comes up on the computer, or an unpaid $35 processing fee for a previous arrest, and then it's another night in jail. See, if you're African American and you're innocent, it's just a false arrest, but pay us anyway. Give us the $35 processing fee. She was doing nothing wrong Saturday night. She was sitting in her car, videotaping police officers pulling over African Americans. She wasn't disrupting their jobs, but she was arrested falsely and was asked to pay $35 for that. Oftentimes, when Black men and women are pulled over for some bullshit reason, the judge will release them on a promise that when they can scrounge together $35, they will pay the processing fee. But if they don't pay it, and why should they? It was just a shakedown. If they don't pay it, eventually there's a bench warrant that they know nothing about. And when they're pulled over, again, for being Black, the bench warrant comes up and they end up going to prison. When a Black motorist gets pulled over here in America for being Black, and they always are, the officer knows to run a check on their license, because if they're poor, the cop will more likely than not discover a bench warrant on an unpaid processing fee for a false arrest, and voila, that Black motorist is arrested again and is fingerprinted, and now has 2 arrests on their record. One false arrest turns into another false arrest. That means more fines. And it also means the judges look busy, the police look busy, the prison warden looks busy. Everyone looks busy, justifying their paychecks at the expense, literally at the expense, of the Black motorists who never broke the law. Now, that's not me talking. That is former Attorney General under President Obama, Eric Holder. his Justice Department in March of 2015, after the riots in Ferguson, Missouri, his Justice Department sent a crew of lawyers down to Ferguson, Mississippi to investigate what the hell is going on in a town populated by mostly black people, but run by white cops. And the Obama Justice Department issued a report. And this is what it said. I'm going to go full screen, I hope. Eric Holder said, local authorities consistently approached law enforcement not as a means for protecting public safety, but as a way of generating revenue. Holder said, adding that racial bias, both implicit and explicit, results in the unconstitutional execution of the law. This is from Politico. One woman, this is the Attorney General of the United States under Barack Obama, Eric Holder. One woman, Holder said, was given 2 parking tickets in 2007 that together tallied $152. To date, she has paid $550 in fines and fees, been arrested twice for unpaid tickets, and spent 6 days in jail. Still, she owes the city $541. Amazing. This is, of course, a variation on the vagrancy laws passed after the Civil War. The vagrancy laws allowed a freed black man to be arrested for loitering. That's what the vagrancy laws, especially in the South, mostly in the South. Lock up a freed black man for loitering, put him to work in a prison instead of on a plantation. We all know, at least my listeners all know, about the loophole in the 13th Amendment. My listeners know this. If you're a student in Ron DeSantis' Florida, you're not allowed to know this. You're not allowed to teach the loophole in the 13th Amendment because it will upset the fragile egos of some white students and their parents. The 13th Amendment outlawed involuntary servitude, except in prison. That's the loophole, except in prison. Here in America, if you get locked up, you are expected to work. You are expected to build furniture, make soap, even cut deli meat for some of America's top corporations. In some states, refusal to work in prison often results in solitary confinement, loss of privileges like being able to see your family on visiting day, and even longer prison sentences. If you don't want to work, they keep you there longer. Oh, and by the way, if you're in prison, some states here in America force you to work to pay for what it costs to keep you incarcerated. America. At any given time, America has close to 2.5 million people in federal, state, local prisons and jails. They're disproportionately poor, if not at all. I think they're pretty much all poor. They're disproportionately people of color. And here's what we don't like to talk about. Most of them never had a trial. They're either waiting trial and can't raise bail, or they've plea bargained for a lesser sentence. Most people, as I said, in prison are poor. They're people of color. And most, I would venture all, never got a fair trial. Their overworked and underpaid public defenders scare them. And they tell them, if you make us go to trial, if you make the state go to trial, and you're found guilty, you will get a stiffer sentence for putting the state through the inconvenience of guaranteeing your Sixth Amendment right to a trial by jury. So you agree to plead guilty, even though you're innocent, even though you never had a trial. You'll do less time. But I'm innocent. Just do the time. That is the American criminal justice system, whether you like it or not. Most Americans, unfortunately, look at the brutality inside our prisons and see it as a deterrent to make people think twice about committing a crime. But we really don't have too many criminals inside those prisons because prisons aren't for criminals. They're for poor people to be used as sources of cheap labor. They're also there, the prisons are there to create the illusion that the state is keeping you safe. It's not. They don't solve crimes. Police, if they're lucky, solve 1% of all crimes. Prisons also generate revenue for private contractors who service the prisons, as well as revenue for prison guards who often have powerful unions. But there's another reason America has so many people behind bars: racism. And there's racism's twin sister, sadism. Racism is alive and well here in America, and with it is sadism. This is a little rough to look at. It's the installment outside the National Memorial for Peace and Justice and the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. It shows 7 Africans in chains, a mother clutching her baby while she reaches for the baby's father. They are either about to be stacked like lumber onto a boat for the Middle Passage to America, or they are about to be auctioned off here in America. The mother and father will be separated, sold to different owners. And I look at this statue and I think of our nation's heritage and where we are today. Now, in the past couple of years, because I wasn't taught critical race in high school, only in the past couple of years have I learned about the loophole in the 13th Amendment and how our economy continues to thrive off free labor in our prisons, and why it's in the best interest of corporate America to get poor people, especially of color, into the criminal justice system as early as possible so they will eventually be behind bars working for free. I have learned that race, the concept of race, was invented to justify slavery, to justify the brutalization of a people. You needed to invent something called race. And you did that by paying religious leaders and scientists to come up with phony spiritual and scientific papers based on this brand new thing called race. You need the idea of race to explain why Black people deserve to be treated so maliciously. So when I look at this statue, I am reminded that, like scientists hired by the tobacco lobby or the fossil fuel lobby, there has always been a certain type of person who will say and write anything to justify a large paycheck. And there will always be a certain type of person willing to believe them to justify their lifestyle. And there will always be rich people who will cut those checks. I look at this statue and I am reminded that when America began, it was already exhibiting the dire consequences of late-stage capitalism, and capitalism was just beginning. The Declaration of Independence was written by a slaveholder, Thomas Jefferson, in 1776. That was the same year Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations, which defined capitalism. Capitalism and America were both defined in 1776. And at both roots of American capitalism is the slave trade, the race to the bottom. Capitalism and America and the slave trade, all about the race to the bottom, paying workers as little as possible, nothing. The brutality, the savagery was all there, in our nation's founding as well as capitalism's founding. And I look at this statue and I'm reminded America can't escape our past. It is, as they say, prologue. I am reminded that because the greedy here in the United States have reclaimed the high ground, even the moral high ground, they think, they cloak themselves in religion. I'm reminded that because the greediest among us, the most sadistic among us, have taken over, we are very quickly returning to our nation's founding: slavery, sadism, racism. Our country was founded off slavery, and before that, indentured servitude, cheap labor. Many of the white men who came to America before the slaves were temporary slaves, indentured servants, working for free to pay off debts, working for free to pay off sentences to the workhouse for crimes they committed back in Great Britain. Here we are in the 21st century, going home, going back to our roots. We have people here in America working for free in prisons. We already have millions of Americans working like indentured servants, unable to pay off crushing debt they rack up to go to college or just eat, pay their rent. We're seeing the legalization of child labor in places like Arkansas. And we already hear from both sides of the aisle that maybe college or even high school isn't necessarily for everyone. Instead of providing free tuition at all public universities, that's what Bernie wanted. Instead of providing free tuition at all public universities, we are now hearing that education is unnecessary for a certain class of people. The term liberal arts comes from ancient Rome. Liberal arts, liberal because it was an education just for slaveholders, not slaves. It was an education just for the liberated. This is where we're heading. Back home to our origins, the antebellum South, ancient Rome, where there were two types of people, the privileged elite and the slaves. We're heading back home. We're heading back home. Our minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It hasn't been raised since July of 2009, which means by doing nothing, our government has effectively eliminated the minimum wage. Do the math. The minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. $7.25 an hour. It's been that way since 2009. You work an 8-hour day getting $7.25 an hour. That's $58 a day. You work a 40-hour week, that comes out to $290 a week. $290 a week if you work a 40-hour week. Effectively, we no longer have a federal minimum wage. Now, 30 states have adopted higher minimum wages, but they're not even livable. $15 an hour, do the math. 20 states here in America have a minimum wage of $7.25. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I apologize. In Georgia, the minimum wage is $5.15. Let me repeat. The minimum wage in the state of Georgia is $5.15. Now, it's superseded by the federal minimum wage in most cases, but $5.15 an hour is the law in Georgia. And I can guarantee you that there are waitresses, babysitters, and farmhands getting paid that, which might explain why, as a Republican candidate for Senate in Georgia last year, Herschel Walker said he was opposed to the concept of a minimum wage. He wanted the country to get rid of the minimum wage. He said, let the market decide. And I look at this statue of the 7 Africans chained to each other, and I think this is what the market decides when we let the people who control the market control our government, which seems to be happening more and more each day. What kind of signal does our federal government, does our president, who promised to raise the minimum wage, what kind of signal is our federal government sending when it says the least amount you must pay someone is $7.25 an hour? Whose side is our federal government on when our government says by law you must pay literally starvation wages? That's good enough for our federal government. Starvation wages, $7.25 an hour. Talking about my president, who I voted for, Joe Biden, who promised he was going to raise the minimum wage. Where are you supposed to live or eat on $7.25 an hour? So now, when I look at this statue, I see something I never saw before. I see an America forged in racism, as well as its twin sister, sadism. I'm not certain you can separate racism from sadism. I always try to explain the motives of Republicans, corporate Democrats. I always say it's all about greed, indifference, power, and racism. But I now see that sadism plays a much bigger part than I was willing to admit. I have come to discover that there is something just as stubborn as the stain of racism here in America. It is the persistence of sadism. At our core, America is a nation of sadists. Not all of us, but too many. Too many Americans are either sadists or complicit in the sadism by remaining silent. If we're going to fix this country, we can't underestimate the role unbridled sadism plays in our decision-making processes. Too many policies here in America don't make sense unless you factor in racism and sadism. For example, I have since learned that we almost had universal health care when Harry Truman was president, but Southern Democrats opposed it because they didn't want Black people to go to their hospitals. Racism and sadism. Medicare for all is cheaper for the government and the taxpayer than for-profit health insurance. Don't forget the biggest payer into health insurance is the federal government. And it would be cheaper for taxpayers and the federal government, according to the CBO, to switch to Medicare for all. If you're a corporation, Medicare for all makes even more sense because it means the government pays your employees' health insurance instead of you. And yet, every corporation is against Medicare for all. It is essentially a subsidy. Medicare for all would be a subsidy to all corporations. You know, for-profit health insurance cuts into the bottom line of every corporation in America. Corporate America, not interested in providing Medicare for all. Sadism. We've learned in Iowa that the administrative expenses incurred making people work for food stamps costs more money than simply giving them the food stamps. I'm laughing at the stupidity. It costs more to administer work requirements for food stamps in Iowa than it does just give people food stamps. We know that when cities divert money away from law enforcement and they move the money towards a social safety net, we know crime rates go down. And cities don't have to pay millions in out-of-court police brutality settlements. We already know a war on drugs doesn't work. We know that the only way to stop drug addiction is through free treatment on demand. Yet, despite all these incontrovertible facts, this country chooses to waste billions on programs that only succeed in punishing our citizens. It makes no sense. Well, sadism. Sadism is the answer. We are ruled by racists and sadists. Our movies, our sports, and our government policies delight in the suffering of others. Our movies, our sports, and our government policies delight in the suffering of others. Sadists. The candidate who's strong on defense or law and order, or fiscal discipline, a fiscal discipline that deprives children of food, education, medicine, well, that candidate is perceived as the wise adult. While the candidate who pushes for peaceful resolution to conflicts, stopping crime before it happens by taking care of our most vulnerable, well, that candidate is labeled delusional, a child, even worse, a socialist. And nowhere is this more pronounced than in the Republican Party, which brings me back to this guy, former Vice President Mike Pence. He's running for president as a devout Christian, but offers not a single program to help the least among us. No, with Mike Pence, it's all about sadism. Mike Pence is a sadist. We already know he hates the LGBTQ community, is responsible for persecuting the LGBTQ community throughout the country, and especially when he was governor of Indiana, when he passed a bill that resulted in countless suicides inside Indiana's LGBTQ community. But over the weekend, Mike Pence appeared at a Republican gala in North Carolina to assure Republican primary voters that he's just not about punishing the LGBTQ community. He's also a white nationalist.
We'll give our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard the support they need to accomplish their mission. We will end the political correctness in the hallways of the Pentagon, and North Carolina will once again be home to Fort Bragg.
Once again, be home to Fort Bragg. White nationalist, Christian, white nationalist. There's the salute, even though he never served in the military. That is white nationalist, not just the homophobe, but the white nationalist, the white Christian nationalist, Mike Pence, one of the most dangerous people in America. Mike Pence is a sadist, and sadists tend to go after the most vulnerable in our community. That's why he targets the LGBTQ community. And he's a racist, pure and simple. So he wants to return Fort Bragg to its original name, This is a big issue in North Carolina. It's a dog whistle. If you're for changing Fort Bragg's name back to Fort Bragg, you're saying, I hate black people, and that's how you win votes in the Republican primary. Fort Bragg's name was officially changed on October 6, 2022, to Fort Liberty after a string of orders within the Pentagon under Joe Biden ruled that any military installation honoring Confederate generals must be called something else. Now, Fort Bragg, as I said, was named after Confederate General Braxton Bragg. During the Civil War, he fought for the South, and not well. He was defeated in the Battle of Chattanooga by General Ulysses S. Grant, and he is considered by most military experts to have been a horrible tactician, which explains why his soldiers tried to assassinate him. On two separate occasions. He is one of the reasons the South lost. Idiot. Hardly the person whose name should be attached to one of America's most important military installations. So why celebrate a loser? Why call it Fort Bragg? Racism and sadism to terrorize African Americans who live in North Carolina, to remind them they're outsiders. He also owned at least 100 slaves. He was an enemy combatant. He fought for the Confederacy. Naming the United States military installation Fort Bragg is tantamount to naming it Fort Goering. The military should not be naming places after our enemies. But Mike Pence and Ron DeSantis have nothing to offer voters other than cruelty, sadism. So they are making this the issue to run on in North Carolina. If you can't give voters good paying union jobs, health care, or a decent education, give them someone to hate. Give them sadism. Make black people feel uncomfortable. Mike Pence should be careful throwing his lot in with people who think the old Confederacy was about preserving a noble way of life. The Confederate flag seen here was carried into the Capitol on January 6th by the very same people who were looking for Mike Pence to hang him. Like I keep reminding you, and I'll be doing this till they change, the Republican Party doesn't believe in governing because that means making rich people pay taxes. So Republicans preach hatred and intolerance, and they create imaginary enemies to serve as scapegoats. There is nothing the Republicans offer that makes anyone's life better. What they offer instead is making someone else's life a lot worse, like members of the LGBTQ community. This is college dropout Charlie Kirk, who runs the Christian nationalist Turning Points USA, which is primarily funded by wealthy members of the religious right with ties to the fossil fuel industry. Now, Turning Points USA wants to replace CPAC. CPAC's in trouble. Turning Points USA thinks it can be the Mecca for Muslim bashers. There's an opening because if you remember, CPAC is run by Matt Schlapp, who recently called Target's gay pride merchandise the work of Satan. But it turns out Matt Schlapp has been out drinking with Satan. Matt Schlapp likes to drink, and when he drinks, allegedly, he likes to sexually assault attractive Republican men, at least according to a civil lawsuit that is going forward, a civil lawsuit that prompted the treasurer of CPAC to quit because he said donations to CPAC were being used to pay Matt Schlapp's legal fees instead of going towards worthy conservative causes. Is there such a thing? Charlie Kirk sees an opening. He thinks Turning Points can be the next CPAC because he's not gay. He hates the gays, and he's straight. You know how I know he's straight? Because he can't wait to tell everybody he's married to the woman who won the Miss Arizona USA pageant competition back in 2012. What could be more heterosexual than Miss Arizona USA? Only a real man gets a trophy wife. And Charlie Kirk held another one of his big summits over the weekend. This time, it was called Turning Point USA's Young Women's Leadership Summit. It was held at the Gaylord Hotel in Texas. The Gaylord Hotel in Texas. And Marjorie Taylor Greene spoke, and she was appalled that the Gaylord Hotel was honoring Pride Month by putting the gay pride flag out front.
Now I'm going to tell you, and I'm standing in the Gaylord, and they might kick me out and never want me to come back. Shame on them. Shame on them. Shame on them for hanging that flag out there. Shame on them.
The Gaylord Hotel, hosting the Turning Points affair, had the gay pride flag outside. The Gaylord Hotel in Texas. She's upset. Marjorie Taylor Greene is upset that the Gaylord Hotel had a gay pride flag outside. That's how I know two things are true. Jesus is on my side, not theirs. And Jesus has an amazing sense of humor. He made some incredibly stupid people. And they're funny. And they're dangerous. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Please subscribe to my newsletter. And we do office hours every Friday night at 8 p.m. Please come to that. Go to my website for the link. Please share this if you enjoyed it. That's the best way to help me. If I said anything that you think is important, please share it with some friends through email or social media. That's the best way to say thank you to me if you want to thank me. Please like this video. Please comment. I read all your comments. And please subscribe to my channel. Most importantly, thank you to the chat room on YouTube that's going right now. And thank you to the moderators who keep it civil. We don't allow garbage people to comment on these videos. Once again, I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak.